Hi, Terry. Thank you so much for joining us for the interview at Employment Japan. Um, we would like to know a lot of things about you and your career and your journey in Japan, starting with a bit of introduction about you, please.
Hi, Ankita. Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks very much for inviting me. Yeah, okay. I was born in New Zealand. I immigrated to Australia when I was 19. I came to Japan on an Australian passport when I was 24, and I've been here ever since. So I've been here about 40 years. And during that 40 years, I must have had probably 5 or 6 different careers, all as entrepreneur, but in different sectors. So let's see, what else can I add? I'm uneducated. I left school when I was 16. Went and worked in a factory for a little while and realized that that wasn't for me. And then I taught myself about computers. And so I was around when the first PC came out. And at that time, I was doing assembler along with hardware and even some primitive networking. That was in 1979, 1980. And so I've been in the tech space basically the whole time there have been PCs.
That's interesting. So, what was your first encounter with Japan and how did you feel about that? Let us know about your initial reactions of being here.
Yeah, actually, it's kind of a stupid story, but it kind of speaks to the fact that I'm not somebody who plans carefully at the beginning. I just follow my passion or my intuition. But of course, once I get into a project, then it's a different matter. So I was in Australia. I was 24. And actually, I just broken up with my girlfriend. I was feeling depressed. I wanted to go travel somewhere. I was thinking to go to India. And I've always had a strong attraction towards India. But one of my friends came back quite sick, and I could see that would be me. So I decided on somewhere else. And I attended a party actually one evening, and my friend had just come back from Japan. And at that time, Australia and Japan had a thing called a working holiday visa.
Mhm.
And they were the only two countries that had that system. It had just been introduced the year before in 1982. So anyway, I was at this party, and back then I was a strict vegetarian, and there was nothing on the table I could eat except rice. So I had a bowl of rice, and I was walking down the table, kind of disappointed. And then right at the end, they had some pickles. So
Mhm.
anyway, I had pickles and rice, and there was this one particular pickle that after I ate it, I thought, wow, this is great. Maybe I should just go to Japan. I've never considered going to Japan. And so I packed up my bags, got a visa, a working holiday visa, and I traveled to Japan. And it actually wasn't until about 6 months after I arrived in Japan, I found out that pickle, which is called kimchi, is not Japanese.
Oh, that's Korean.
So I actually came to Japan under a mistake, and it was a mistake that I arrived here. But I have to say, once I arrived in Japan, amazing country, amazing people, and I didn't want to go home. So it doesn't matter why you come. What matters more is why you stay.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yes, I agree. So, do you speak Japanese?
And so the answer is that yes and no. I tell people that I'm advanced intermediate.
Mm-hmm.
So I can understand about 90% of given conversations. I mean, if they're casual conversations, I'm basically good. But if it's business or formal, there is some vocabulary that I haven't learned and some sentence structure that I'm not very good with, passive sentence structure. And so I'm by no means absolutely fluent. But I will say that it also depends on who I'm talking to.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're older men, generally they don't get to the subject very quickly, and so they leave the most important verbs and to the end, and it's all nouns up until then as they go through their preamble. I find it very difficult to follow them. But if it's a younger female or a younger guy, and especially people who have been in an international setting and know how to speak clearly, for those people, I have no problem.
So how did you learn Japanese?
Well, actually, I'm not a natural language learner. I'm actually not that interested in learning language other than to communicate. So once I got to, a level of communication where I could connect with people, I kind of didn't really put a lot more effort into it. And besides, I'm an entrepreneur, and so I'm kind of busy with my entrepreneurial stuff. But how I learned was quite simple. For the first 3 years, I depended on other people. And then my first wife got pregnant, and so that took her out of the equation. And I started going to Japanese classes. And I found that for the first 6 months that I went, 5 hours a day, 3 days a week for 6 months, made a huge difference in terms of my ability to be able to become mobile and be able to speak some Japanese. I was by no means fluent, but it gave me that first step and it gave me confidence. And I think people need that. So I always tell people, if you can afford to go and do full-on lessons, you should do it right from the start. But if you can't do that, then at least do part-time lessons, at least for 6 months. And 6 months will get you into intermediate level Japanese, and that's enough to start being able to communicate. And then from there, it's basically been osmosis. So, I hear a word, I write it down, I check it, and, I get sentence patterns that I get used to saying. I practice some new ones every now and again. I practice new words. They don't necessarily stay in my head, but, somehow they pop up again when I need them. So my method is not recommended. The recommended method is to go out and learn straight away. I had a very good friend who learned Japanese like hardcore from zero to expert in 2 years. And in my experience, the fastest you can learn Japanese, as somebody who doesn't have any connection with kanji at all, i.e. not Chinese, I would say is about 18 months. And that's about the fastest I've seen it. I think the CIA used to have an 18-month program, actually, some years ago for diplomats. And they thought 18 months was about the right period, and they really grilled those people. So, if you're here for 5 years and you're still not speaking great Japanese, I don't think you should feel too bad. And let's face it, recently many of the jobs that are available are technical jobs. And so, you don't need great Japanese. You just need to be able to survive and make friends and that kind of thing. And I think that's good enough for most people.
Yes, that is true. That is true. So then we should now shift to the career aspects. What you like? Would you like to talk about your motto in life and why have you chosen it?
Okay, my model in life. Well, part of my life has been molded around circumstances beyond my control. So I left home because I didn't get along with my stepfather. And I couldn't get a job because back then, in the 70s, jobs were hard to come by. So I worked in a factory. So I wouldn't say that as a model, but when I emigrated to Australia, I made a conscious effort to try and get into a computer company. And actually, when I did the interview, the salary at that time was $15,000 a year. And I had a competitor who had a degree in computer science. And so I offered to cut my salary by 50% so that they'd take me on. And they took me on. So from there, I just simply studied hard. My girlfriend was going to the local university. Actually, I was supporting her. And so I would use her library card in the weekends and go into the university library and study Boolean algebra and discrete logic and that kind of thing so that I could do my job better. So over a period of 4 years, I went from being an absolute know-nothing trainee. Actually, I became the second highest paid person in the company. And so a lot of that was through overtime and just studying and pushing myself as hard as I could. But I realized that, this is a great chance. Computers were a great chance to establish a career. So once I came to Japan, I had the benefit of knowing about computers. So that was actually very helpful. But I also have a very good imagination, and I started thinking about all these businesses that you could do if you were in Japan, because back in the 80s, Japan was a very conformist society. There weren't many foreigners, and there were lots of things that were available in Australia and New Zealand that were not available in Japan. So I went into the import-export business, and at one point I was selling semiconductors from Akihabara to a military electronics company in Australia for submarine detectors. And the joke is that I would hop on my bicycle with a pocket full of cash, cycle down to Akihabara, buy the semiconductors, put them in the post, and then when they came out the other end, they were put into a top secret facility and then turned into these Barra sonar buoys. So that was a kind of adventure. And my model in life, if there is one, is that you accept all opportunities and then take the opportunities that resonate the most. And some opportunities, there doesn't seem to be any reason why they come, they just come. But if you ignore them, you may ignore, your future career. And I'll give you one more example of that. In 1989, I hired an Indian fellow in Hong Kong. This is before internet, right? So all I could do was talk to him on the phone. He seemed like a very nice guy, and he knew about the latest thing called local area networks. And I had just installed Japan's first local area network, which was actually called Novell version 1.0. And the very first server for Novell was with the Australian Trade Commission. And I was the one who installed it. So I needed an engineer who knew about LANs. And he came over. I hired him without seeing him. He came over. He turned out to be a super nice guy. And Rajiv Prabhakaran. And he was so good that I said to him, "Are there any more guys like you in India?" And he said, "Why, yes, there are." And so he introduced me to his dad, who was a trader. I went and stayed with his dad, and his dad set me up with a visit to NIIT. And back then, there were no Japanese in India doing tech. So I met the dean, and the dean gave me a personal, tour of the campus. And then one thing led to another, and I started hiring Indian engineers. And in the end, I brought about 70 engineers into Japan. And I traveled to India about 30 times. But, the starting point for that was a phone call to Hong Kong. And I was kind of nervous hiring somebody I couldn't see and never met. But on the other hand, he seemed like a nice guy, and I just went with my intuition. And that turned out to be the right thing.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. So, okay, my another question about your career is, what achievement are you proudest about?
Well, to be honest, I'm not really proud of any of my achievements because they're all temporary. I did start Japan's first online recruiting company. So I'm kind of proud of being first. That was Gaijin.com. And we were the first mid-career. There was another online company, which was Recruit. They were doing graduates from university. They had a Sotsugo site. But I was the first person to do mid-career Tenshoku. And a lot of people told me that it couldn't be done. They said that recruiting was a dirty business. Back then, it was considered a dirty business. And so that's why I called it Daijob, because actually the phrase that we used was Daijobu, the
Yeah.
Kenshoku wa Daijobu desu. And the year after we started, it was a huge hit. We had 165 resumes, 165,000 resumes in our database. So we went from nothing and an idea to becoming the biggest player by far in the online space. So I'm kind of proud of having started it. Now, it was a successful company and I had a successful exit. But like I say, all of those things are ephemeral. Money comes, money goes, businesses come, businesses go. But the thought of changing people's lives is really powerful, and that makes me feel good. So back then, when I first started Daijob, the average Japanese had to work 30 years in the same company. And if they were unlucky and got recruited by a black company, they had no way to leave that company because it was shameful to switch jobs, and also it was considered very risky.
Yeah.
And then for those people now, well, the average young Japanese under 30 has switched jobs 2 to 3 times. So that is a huge paradigm shift between 30 years in one job and being stuck and being extremely depressed if you pick the wrong company, to now being able to shop around. That's like quality of life has improved so dramatically for those people.
Yes.
So I'm kind of proud of that.
Yes, indeed. That's a good one. So, what aspects of Japan culture do you like the most? Or what aspect of Japan, maybe?
Well, there's so many. It's an amazing country. I mean, there are some not amazing things as well, but fundamentally, the food, the people, the history, the scenery, the traditions, they're all amazing. I will tell you one story that kind of sums it up. So about 3 years ago, I visited a drum maker, the old taiko, where they stretch the leather and then they make the wood for the drum has to be carved very carefully. And he took me through his workshop, and it was okay. I mean, you don't drum. Okay, once you've seen one drum, you've seen them all. And I was kind of bored actually, and I said to the guy, "Look, I know that this is your shop and you're showing us all your drums, and that's cool, but do you have a really interesting story that you can tell me?" And he smiled and he took me upstairs, the rickety old stairs up to a second floor. And in the back was his warehouse. And he showed me a couple of really old drums that were like 500 years old. And he told me that the local temples, actually temples around the country, not just the local ones, they send him drums so that he can repair them. And he opened up the drum and he showed me that the maker of that drum 500 years ago had written inside the drum. And he said that sometimes when he opens the drum, what's written there is different from the official history that is recorded in the history books. And that means that history was rewritten for some reason, right? Political reason. But this guy is looking back in history 500 years to the very person who made that drum and then sealed it. And then it was never opened again until he saw it. And, for me, that tradition, I mean, he's a skilled craftsman, so that's obviously great. But the history and the tradition and the uniqueness of Japan is encapsulated in that story.
Yes.
So, yeah, that's what fascinates me about Japan. It's really a cool place.
Nice. So, when I talk about the working style, what changes do you bring into your working style to fit in, already successful Japan?
Well, Japan is still conformist, and so there's plenty of space for entrepreneurs. And, as you must have noticed, recently there is a drive or a push by local and regional governments to recruit foreign entrepreneurs. So I'm a member of TIE, which is the Indus Entrepreneurs, and Indus obviously means India. TIE originally started in Santa Clara in Silicon Valley, but I'm a founding member and a charter member here in Japan. It is a truism that not most, but many of the entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley are not originally American. They're immigrants. And why is that? Because they're, they have no old boy network to fall back on. They have no one to depend on. So they either survive and thrive or they don't. And I think immigrants are super important for any economy, especially a mature economy like Japan's. So, what I'm doing is encouraging young entrepreneurs, other entrepreneurs to start. It's not just my stuff. I also help others. And I want to create a kind of like a link or a bridge between Japan inside and outside using these talented people so that we can sort of like change the basics of society in Japan. I don't want Japan to lose its traditions, but I do want Japan to survive into the future. I have 5 kids and they're all half Japanese. So I only want the best for them. And, we need a healthy, vibrant Japan commercially and societally. And one way to do that is to bring in new blood. So anyway, the good news is that there are a number of startup efforts around the country, places like, of course, Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, Osaka, Kyoto, Fukuoka, Sapporo, where they're deliberately inviting foreign entrepreneurs to enter competitions. And then in winning those competitions, they get local support and local investment, and they set up in Japan. And this is really exciting to see. So I want to see more of that. And I think it can only benefit the country in the long term.
Yes, that is true. So I would also want to understand if you would have any tips and advice for Japanese professionals who work in multicultural team. What would be your message for them?
I find often that Japanese are reluctant to take leadership positions. And that's understandable because the education system doesn't emphasize people wanting to be outstanding, that they're supposed to be part of a group. But actually, successful companies need leaders. And my model has been that when I start a company, usually actually I will bring in 50-50 foreigners and Japanese. And then as the company starts to work up the food chain, it needs more fluent Japanese speakers and also better penetration into the client base, which is usually Japanese. And so that is a fantastic opportunity for young Japanese because, people like myself, and there are many like me now, we don't promote based on seniority, right? We promote based on results and capability. Yes. And so I have absolutely no problem with a 25-year-old Japanese female managing much older Japanese males if she can do the job. So I think that my message is that if you're a Japanese and if you're young and perhaps you are, looking at a 30-year career plan to get to a responsible position, foreign companies or mixed companies like mine are really a great place to start. And then once you have that experience and you have that on your resume, then larger, more famous companies will want to hire you because you got that training and you have that experience and you have the proof that you can do it.
True. All right. So what wisdom or advice or tips can you give to the people who are new to Japan or the ones who are planning to come to Japan now?
Well, clearly, being able to speak some Japanese is very important. But I do get people asking me, what's better? Shall I learn Japanese or shall I learn technology? And my answer is that you usually get hired for your technology chops, not for your language skills. And actually, there is this kind of like paradox. When you don't speak a lot of Japanese, Japanese actually can be very kind to you because they want to help, especially if you have other skills.
Yeah.
But once you get to a certain level of Japanese, if you are not perfect in speaking, actually people get irritated with you because every now and again you'll say something a little bit weird or a little bit off or not appropriate or something like that. And it just like it's jarring. You've got this person who seems to be fluent and then suddenly they're not. And then people start to wonder, did they say that on purpose or did they make a mistake? And so that paradox is there. And so if you're going to learn Japanese, the only way to learn Japanese is by immersion. And that means coming to Japan. So, I have a company in Pune in India. And as you may know, Pune is a kind of center of Japanese learning for India, one of them. And there are thousands of people learning Japanese there right at the moment. And many of them get to N3, some to N2, and a very few get to N1. But unless they've actually worked in Japan, even if they're N2, it's quite difficult for them to communicate.
Yes.
So, again, it comes back to this question, do I spend all my time learning Japanese, or do I learn the tech first and then learn Japanese? And, if you're signing up for university or in your first or second year, I would say that you focus on your tech first and then Japanese secondarily.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much, Terrie, for all the insightful information and talking about your experience. This has been a really interesting interview.